Hello, and welcome to Real Film Snobs. I'm Angela Yeager. I am pleased to have with me back on the show once again my good friend and soul sister, Mo Childers. Welcome to the show, Mo.
Thank you. Happy to be back.
Yeah, so Mo and I debated. I was like, you have to come back. She's only been on the show once, and we were trying to think of all sorts of other things to do. And then I was like, let's just do Cary Grant again, because I've been in the down mood, and Cary Grant always lifts my spirits. So we decided to do another episode on Cary Grant. Last time you were here, I think we just did. I'm trying to remember what our theme was. Was it just Cary Grant's
I think
lesser?
lesser known, maybe.
Yeah, but that's what we're doing this time too. So we're
Oh,
doing lesser known, but this time we're focused on comedies. I think last
yes.
time we had some dramas in there. This is all comedies all the time. I've been in the mood for some comedies, so this was a great way to bring in more Cary Grant. Oh, I think we were thinking about doing war movies or something, but it was no, it's
Yeah,
like
we
some of them
talked
were
about
hard
it.
to find, and yeah. So we got a good mix here, and of course we love Cary Grant. We'll veer next time Mo's back on. We'll do something else, maybe Jimmy Stewart or some other director, just not Doris Day. Sorry, Mo.
That sounds good.
We'll have to do a different actor. But okay, so let's start with our first movie, which is actually very lesser known. A couple of these actually, after we called it lesser known comedies, I like they were actually kind of big hits. But this one is definitely a pretty obscure. Wedding Present from 1936 by director Richard Wallace, director I'm not familiar with. Cary Grant plays Charles Mason. He's like an ace reporter who is dating his girlfriend named Rusty Fleming, played by Joan Bennett, and they're both like crack reporters, and this is like the golden age of when reporters were just like these like people basically literally running after fire trucks. And they go out on all these adventures, and it's a really interesting movie because I think for at least the first half hour, you're like, I'm not sure what the plot of this movie actually is, because it's just them getting into like various schemes for stories they're working on that puts them in touch at one point with a gangster and another one with this like duke. And you think, where's the actual story? Well, the story comes into play when he is promoted to become the city editor, and then he decides to take his job very seriously, and he starts being like not fun anymore. And so she breaks up with him when he becomes like that and moves off to New York, and then he chases her to New York City. So that's the story. It's a very silly movie. This one's pretty hard to find. Mo actually owns it in one of her many Cary Grant box sets. That way she has a whole array of Cary Grant box sets, if you will. So that's how we were able to watch it on disc. So you might be able to find it at a library, maybe on YouTube. It's a little bit hard to find. It's a silly little movie, and it has its moments. I'm curious what you thought of it, Mo.
Like you said at the beginning, I was wondering where we were going and where this wedding present was going to play into the film.
Yeah, yeah,
And it just sort of felt at the beginning like, oh, they're just playing lots of tricks on each other and their coworkers. And then when the Duke comes in, things, start changing a little bit. Well, after they had their, you know, fun and games with him, uh,
right.
before they
But
before
I
they
thought
kind
the
of
Duke
circle
was going
back.
to be the story. Did you think that
I
was the
I
storyline of the
I
movie at
did.
first? Because
I
it's like
did
it goes
because
on for quite a long time, and then they end
yeah,
up in that plane with the pilot looking for a lost ship. And then I thought, now is this the plot? But that's
yes,
not the plot either. That's
nope.
just like a total side thing. They shoot this whole thing in a plane just for like a 5 minute gag. It's
Yeah,
just to show like all these crazy things that they do together because they're like true reporters at heart, both of them. And
and
so
tricksters.
and tricksters. I love her character though. What I really liked about this was actually Joan Bennett, because her character of Rusty, like at one point, the one editor says, "Oh, like he's going to take this job and he'll start making good money, and she'll be glad to quit her job and just start raising some babies." And I thought, "Oh boy, here we go, 1936." But then it turns out that's not at all what she wants. She's like really disgusted with him when he gets a promotion. She's like, "No." And
Yeah, she's
she
angry.
can't settle down herself. Like she starts to get romanced by this guy who's like a total drip, and
Yes.
realizes like she misses being a reporter. She misses her career and her exciting life, and she doesn't have to give that up with Cary Grant. So yeah, I liked that part of it. And they were in another film together that we reviewed on the last episode, or Brown Eyes.
Yep.
And so this one is another one with him and Joan Bennett, both kind of lesser known. I think, comedies of Cary Grant's, but this sees him doing a lot of what he does best, which is like being zany and kind of, um, chasing people all over the place and talking fast. And both him and Joan Bennett do a lot of that in this film. So,
Yes. What did you think about the wedding present without giving away what it was?
oh, you mean at the end?
Yes.
I thought, yeah, I thought that was a great end, and I thought the chaos and everything. Although I kind of thought, I'm pretty sure you'd go to prison for doing all those things he just did, and you
Sure.
wouldn't just get to like ride away into the sunset, like
Right.
literally bringing down the entire city of New York. Whoops, I gave it away. Oh well, people. It's a hard movie to find, and it's not really about the plot anyway. So
No,
I thought,
no. It's
I
more
thought it
just
was
a fun
funny.
ending.
I thought it was interesting though, the guy that she's dating. So what really drives her at first is like she bonds with his sister, and the sister is the one that kind of gets her to start dating this guy. And at the beginning, I thought, oh well, maybe this is like going to be a hard decision for her to make between these two guys. But then, like as they go on, they made him more unlikable, so it'd be more
Yes.
obvious, like that she
Yeah,
wouldn't want to stay with this guy.
he seemed like he might be fun initially, but then when you saw more of him, yeah, like you said, he was basically a drip and not any fun at all. And then they brought the mom into the picture and
And
yeah.
that was really bad because she's like, you have to wear this wedding dress that was worn for by 2 centuries of women in this family, and it's just like this giant awful poofy thing, and she's like, yeah, it's a bit much, isn't it? So yeah, it is fun, but definitely one of his lesser known and probably lesser comedies, but it's definitely not the worst Cary Grant movie I've seen either. So
No,
it was
no, it wasn't terrible. It had fun moments for
I'm
sure.
glad you owned it on a box set because I probably wouldn't have gotten to see it otherwise. It's not the easiest one to find.
Yeah,
So
I owned it, but I had never watched it. So
so it gave you an excuse. That's basically, we're just really, that's what these shows are about, really. We're just trying to like go through Mo's collection of stuff she hasn't yet watched that she owns and finding an excuse so she can watch them finally. So we'll see what else is in your collection for the next episode.
sounds good.
Okay, so let's move on to our next one.
All right, that's me. Our next film was Arsenic and Old Lace from 1944, directed by one of my favorites, Frank Capra, and obviously starring Cary Grant. Um, Something interesting about this one is Arsenic and Old Lace was a play on Broadway first, and they decided to make a movie, and so they filmed the movie in 1941 while the play was going on, and the producers stipulated that the movie couldn't come out in theaters until after the run on Broadway was done. So they had planned it to come out in 1942, but the play was like a
Still
smash.
going. Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
so it went on for 3.5 years. So that was why it didn't come out until 1944, even though it had been filmed in 1941.
Oh, that's really interesting. I did not know that about the history of that, but
Yeah, and
that
three
makes
of
a lot of
the
sense.
yeah, three actors from the play were in the movie. They gave them time off to film the in the movie. So
Who's the same?
the two aunts and the brother Freddie, or Freddie, sorry, uh, the one who thinks he's the president, Teddy, not Freddie,
Oh,
Teddy,
Teddy. Yeah, because
Teddy
it's Teddy
Brewster. Yes,
Roosevelt. Yes.
yes.
So they
So
were the same. Okay,
they were the
interesting.
same
I wondered.
characters. Yeah. So Cary Grant plays the main character, Mortimer Brewster, and the Brewsters supposed to be like an old family in Brooklyn um, that's been there since the Mayflower. And he is an author and writes books on basically against marriage, that marriage is an outdated, superstitious thing that shouldn't be around anymore. But he ends up falling in love with the girl next door, who ends up being a minister's daughter. And the movie opens with them getting married at the courthouse on Halloween. After they're married, they go home to Brooklyn to let their families know that they're married and to leave on their honeymoon to Niagara Falls. When they get there, and Mortimer Brewster is in his aunt's house where his brother also lives, he discovers a body in a window seat, and things kind of deteriorate from there.
Hmm. And of course, the body in the window seat is a famous line now, and even the name of a book. And it's it's a very famous part of cinematic history. The body in the window seat. So, and it's from this movie. I guess from the play technically, but I think the movie made it famous, right? And this allows Cary Grant to do what he does so well, which is just go completely unhinged because he finds out early on, I think it's not giving anything away, that his two little old aunts, who are like, everyone in the neighborhood's like, they're saints. They give to the poor, they help with this, they bring soup to the neighbors when they're not doing well, that they're these little old aunts of his are up to some shenanigans at their house. And in their head, they're doing a charity service for lonely old men who come to their door and they relieve them of their loneliness. And so, if that wasn't enough, you have his brother, who calls himself Teddy Roosevelt, who's mentally ill and thinks he's Teddy Roosevelt. And then, of course, his other brother shows up, who's now a criminal, and brings with him Dr. Einstein. The plot sounds so ridiculous that I'm sure a lot of people are going, "What? How can this be any good?" It somehow works. It almost works besides itself when you start to describe the plot, because the part about them getting married happens like the first 5 minutes. The
Uh-huh.
movie is really him in this house with all these crazy people, literally. I mean, everyone seems a little unhinged, even the people that aren't supposed to be mentally ill, right?
Yep.
Just totally everyone's going wackadoodle, and the local police officer even at one point comes in and finds Cary Grant gagged and bound on a chair, and he thinks he's acting out a scene in a play. Oh, because I don't know if we mentioned, but Cary Grant's character is a drama critic, so he critiques plays. So everyone he meets is like pitching their plays to him too, and he's trying to deal with the situation of like murder happening in this house, and he's going crazy trying to sort it out. And he's trying to protect his aunts, but also keep them from continuing to murder people. And so it is just total classic screwball comedy. And Cary Grant doing what he does best, which is going fully unhinged, hopping up and down, running around, literally running. I mean, the whole movie, I mean, he must have lost 20 pounds making this movie because he's just running endlessly. And I hadn't seen it in quite a few from my dad, so exciting on Criterion Blu-ray. So it's a great transfer. And I'd forgotten just how smart and funny this movie is and how just totally preposterous the plot is. When you actually start to talk about it, you're like, oh, and then there's this crazy Dr. Einstein who comes in, and he's played by Peter Lorre, the king of playing creepy. I mean, as soon as Peter Lorre shows up, you're just like, oh, okay. And then the brother, whose name is just Joseph, looks like Boris Karloff, which they keep talking about in the movie. It's sort of obvious that he looks like Boris Karloff because he's had so many surgeries on his face because he's got this criminal past. Yeah,
And and
it's a
and
really
Cary Grant
crazy
starts
movie.
kind of seeming almost like he's going a little cuckoo in the film
Right.
because of kind of bouncing off of what everybody else has going on.
Oh yeah, he seems at one point his fiance, well, I guess she's not his fiance, his now wife, the bad guys try to like kidnap her, and she runs to him when, and she's like, "Your brother tried to kill me." And he's just like, "Yes, yes, dear. I'm trying to deal with this paperwork right now for Teddy." He's just like, "Yes, yes, dear." she's and she's just so pissed. She like leaves the house and slams the door. But she keeps going across the street. Her house is across the street, her father's house. She keeps going back though, and then checking on him again, which, it's Cary Grant. I guess I could see why you would do that. So I had forgotten about the kissing scene at the end. I hadn't seen this movie in a long time.
Oh,
That he kisses her all the way around the house to keep her from talking
yes.
out loud to the police. There's just some really great physical comedy work happening in this movie that is pretty amazing. It's been a long time since I'd seen it.
So the
Had you watched it recently?
I hadn't watched it in a few years, and so it was fun to watch it again. And you always forget pieces of movies when you haven't watched them for a while. So it was fun to
Hmm.
see that again. And I did, when I was looking up, found out that Boris Karloff was actually in the play, but
Oh,
they couldn't release him to be part of the movie because he was the big name draw of the play. So he allowed them to use his name throughout the movie, though, to refer to the brother that's supposed to look like him.
oh, that's funny. I didn't know about that. That's
Yeah, that
really.
was
What did you look
interesting.
up a bunch of trivia
I
about
I
this
just
movie?
well, when I was looking it up, and I started just like reading something on Wikipedia, and I was like, oh, I didn't know that, and I didn't know that. And, oh,
Yeah. Yeah, and Frank Capra, a great director who worked actually more with Jimmy Stewart than he did with Cary Grant. And I didn't look this up, and I meant to before we taped. So maybe some film snobs out there, if you see this episode, tell me. I was thinking maybe this was the only Frank Capra movie Cary Grant did, but now I'm like, Cary Grant did so many movies, I don't want to say that because Jimmy Stewart worked with Frank Capra a lot, but in quite a few films, and Gary Cooper too. But I don't remember if this was the only film they did together. So
If they did another one, I don't think I've seen it, but I know my other favorite one by him is You Can't Take It With You.
Right, which is Jimmy Stewart.
Yes.
So yeah, but Frank Capra's done a ton of films, so it wouldn't surprise me if they had worked together again. But unlike Hitchcock or some other directors, it's not one I associate with Cary Grant as much. I mainly know him for this film. But anyway, it's a great movie. Highly recommend it if you've never seen Arsenic and Old Lace. Not really lesser known, but I feel like one that because it was so, I feel like it's not always mentioned at the very top sometimes of the Cary Grant canon. And watching this reminded me of this. The one thing this has that is unusual for his films, the female love interest is really cursory in this film. And Cary Grant
Yeah.
usually plays so well off of his female co-leads. You think of the Joan Bennett's or the Katharine Hepburns or Jean Arthur, all the women
Yep.
he works so well with. Myrna Loy. This is one of the few films where the girlfriend role is just she's kind of barely, I mean, she's fine, but she's not part of the comedy. She's not. Cary Grant usually works really well with women. In this case, it's more about him with the aunts and all
Yes.
the family members. So anyway, okay, well, we'll move on to our next one.
Okay. Next is Operation Petticoat from 1959, directed by Blake Edwards, and again starring Cary Grant and Tony Curtis. This film is kind of a look back or a flashback to World War II, where Cary Grant's character is a captain of a submarine at or when the U.S. first joins World War II in 1941. And the submarine that he's captaining is docked in the Philippines and prepping to take off when it's sunk by the Japanese, basically. And he goes to his commander and he wants to really quickly repair the submarine and get it out into the war. And the commander says, yeah, okay, sure, go ahead, but really doesn't believe that they're going to be able to, it's going to be seaworthy again. So he starts taking people out of the sub and putting them in other commands. And Cary Grant is trying to, get it repaired. So he asks for just kind of, if they can scrape any people up, send them his way. So he gets sent Tony Curtis's character, Lieutenant Holden, and he was an admiral's aide known for dance contests and golfing rather than actually doing anything, that we would consider typical wartime. And he gets made the supply officer because he says that he has a knack for, finding things. And so basically he steals and scavenges to find things that they can use to get the sub back in the water so that they can get to Australia.
Good summary of the plot. Yeah. And Tony Curtis and Cary Grant, this first time what's funny about this is I had to look it up because I was trying to remember because I noticed Tony Curtis did a Cary Grant accent in Some Like It Hot. And he was influenced, of course, by working with him in this film. And then he does Some Like It Hot a year later, came out in 1960. Okay. And because he does the Cary Grant accent when in Some Like It Hot throughout the whole movie and nails it perfectly. And I think it's because he worked with him here. Interesting to see them side by side. I had never seen this movie before, and it was one.
Oh,
it was one of. I was actually. I looked it up. It's actually one of the biggest hits Cary Grant had in his career financially. This movie was a huge box office hit in 1959. Blake Edwards, of course, who is best known for doing the Pink Panther movies as well as many others. He's a comedic director. Really did a lot of screwball comedy in the 60s into the 70s and 80s. Married to Julie Andrews famously. So there's some really great aspects of this film. What I will say I didn't like about it is, unlike our next film, this film and the next one, weirdly have plot. They're both set in World War II, and they both have plots that center around females or women basically upending the men, right? Or upending everything. I thought it was handled better in Father Goose. What bothered me about Operation Petticoat, and yes, I know it's 1959 and it's sexist and blah, 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 but it's like all the women that come on board are supposed to be military officers, right? They're female military. but they act like that these guys have never seen a woman before, number one, but don't know how to treat them with any sort of professionalism. So Tony Curtis and all the men spend all of their time chasing them around, trying to sleep with them. And Cary Grant just views the women as just like a bother, getting in their way. And it just wasn't, you know what, the parts I thought were the funniest were at the beginning with the back and forth with Tony Curtis and Cary Grant. I kind of, in my opinion, the movie kind of gets a little off when it starts focusing more on all the love relationships with all the
Hmm.
women on the ship. I liked the banter with Cary Grant and Tony Curtis the best.
Yes.
Um,
I would agree that that's what I liked best too, were the parts and just the things that Tony Curtis does to find all of the parts. That's the that to go into the sub. Uh, I will say the one female role that I guess they did still tie in sort of a love interest was the one who was very mechanically inclined.
the one who's in the works in the engine room with the other
Yes,
guy. Yeah, yeah.
yes, I did like her because she was the only one that I felt like didn't necessarily bring that whole sexist
She
thing in
actually
too
get well, and
much.
she actually earns the guy's respect because the engine room guy at first says it's bad luck to have a woman in the engine room,
Yes,
and then after a while, you see towards the end of the film, she's helping him fix the engine and doing everything side by side with him because she knows just as much, if not more, than he does. So,
exactly.
but the other women are just treated like they're for eye candy and as for sex,
They're
basically.
just women.
Yeah, but they're not at the end when it's like, oh, I've married the women. I was like, oh, come on, like women in the military were there as service people too. They weren't just there, for legs. And so that it just, I know that's the dated part, but I just wish they had focused more on because the idea of itself was funny enough, I thought. And I think Tony Curtis being Mr. Metrosexual, walking around with his silk, robes and everything,
Yes.
and Cary Grant being like so disgusted, like, how did you get into the military? To me, that was
Yeah.
the funny part of
Yeah.
it, seeing them play
Yeah.
off of each
I
other.
I agree. I think they could have left out a lot of the things with the nurses and it wouldn't have
Right.
done
But then it wouldn't be called
anything
Operation
negative.
Petticoat, which is also
True,
funny because
true.
people were even wearing petticoats by the 59. But anyway, but the Tony Curtis also interestingly paying a character that Cary Grant could have played 20 years earlier because Cary Grant,
Yeah.
we see him bringing up Baby or some of those movies would run around in like silk pajamas or something, not on purpose, but usually as a gag, but something, he has that more feminine flair that Tony Curtis also has as a womanizer type of male. So it
Hmm.
was very interesting to me to see them, but now Cary Grant's much older in 59. And I forgot to mention, we picked one movie from each decade. So our first one was 36, Arsenic and Lace, which to me is pretty much prime Cary Grant period, is 40s. That's when his career was just at smoking hot. 59 is Operation Petticoat. And then our last film, which I'll pivot to in a minute here, Father Goose is 60. So we tried to basically start from the beginning to the end of his career. So it's kind of cool to do. But yeah, I enjoyed it. It's a huge hit, I guess. It was interesting to
I
me.
didn't realize that it was a huge hit because it's never been like a favorite of mine.
Mhm.
But I did read online that it did get nominated for an Academy Award for writing.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's even less progressive than even like the 36 film we talked about at the beginning
Hmm.
with Joan Bennett. Like the female characters are so sexist, but 59 is probably one of the worst periods for women in movies in general. Like late 50s into the early 60s is when yeah, Hollywood was not at its best for portrayals of women. You actually
Which is
female
why you don't
characters.
like those Doris Day movies.
Yeah,
They
probably because
fall
I
in
really
that
like
window.
30s, 20s, 30s, 40s. I do okay. You get into the 50s, 60s, and American movies, especially the female roles are just ridiculous. So, anyway, so we'll move on to our last film, which is another one I hadn't seen before, Father
Oh,
Goose. And this one I actually am glad I saw. So, 1964, this is Cary Grant's last role on screen. He decided to leave acting after this. It's also set during World War II. He plays a grizzled boozer who definitely enjoys his drinks from time to time, or most of the time. He serves as a lookout on an island and finds himself suddenly joined by an uptight teacher, played by Leslie Caron, or is it Caron?
I
I'm
don't
so
know.
bad with French name, and her all-female class of young students. So this time it is Cary Grant once again being upended by a bunch of females, but this time I think it really works for multiple reasons. One, the teacher is very uptight, and that whole thing always works. It makes me think of Katharine Hepburn and Humphrey Bogart, of course, in the most classic, when they have the grizzled old guy with the uptight kind of spinstery woman. This woman, in her case, is only 30s, so she's not really a spinster, but they kind of portray her like she is, but I'm like, she's like literally half his age. So, but then the students are all female and they're international. It was like an international school. So they're like French and they're speaking all, they're very different from his character. And he has this great rapport with the oh gosh, I'm going to forget the actor who plays the British captain who's kind of giving him orders. He's a very famous British actor, Trevor or something. I'm forgetting his last name, but with lots of jokes between them. But this was his last role, and the one Cary Grant said is the closest to his actual real personality, which I thought was
Oh,
interesting. I
interesting.
read an interview. Yeah, he said, because he wasn't, people forget Cary Grant was raised really poor, working class in England. Like he is not, despite his dapper, elegant persona, that was not what he was from. And so he said the real him was a guy who liked to kick back with like cruddy clothes on, drinking a beer or whatever. And so this character, he related a lot more with this character than characters he usually played. He said it was the closest to his real personality. So it's not the dapper lady. Well, he does get the girl because it's Cary Grant, and even in his 60s, he's in his 60s here. He looks great, I
He
think.
does look great.
Yeah. So even though Leslie is half his age, it still kind of works. It doesn't seem too creepy, and also she's a perfect comedic foil for him because she's kind of uptight, but she's also very cultured, right? And so that's part
Yep.
of the whole thing. Like at one point, he starts to attack her, and she's like, I'm French, right? Like I'm not as uptight. That's what I
Yes.
liked about the writing in this one. She's like, I'm not as uptight as you think. I'm French. Like I know how to. I've done this. I've done this. I've done this. But like we're around children right now, so I'm trying to be proper. But and then he starts to realize, oh, like she's intriguing, and they're going to fall for each other. But it's all the funny things that happen in the meantime. And then the kids always somehow getting themselves into some sort of fray that they have to then rescue them from, which is
Did
very
you, did
funny.
did you like their nicknames?
The nicknames of oh yeah, all the people. Yeah, they all had great nicknames.
But
Besides
Cary Grant was the filthy beast,
Filthy Beast.
and
Yes.
Leslie Caron was Goody Two Shoes.
Yes. And that's what the character said. I'm going to have to look it up while we're talking, but keep talking, Mo. Talk.
so so the folks that they're talking to when they're on the island, the military folks, start referring to them as Goody Two Shoes and the filthy beast, and uh, his boat has been ruined, and so he's trying to fix his boat, and Leslie Caron and the six little girls that she's in charge of move into the hut that he uses to stay in initially. So he's sleeping on the boat, and they start stealing everything from his boat so that they can get by, stealing his clothes. They hide his booze, so he's upset about that, and take over all the food, and
Yes,
they
it's
they
Trevor
get in.
Howard who plays
Yes,
Houghton, the
yes,
military. Yeah, Trevor Howard. I knew he's very famous British actor. He's the one that calls him. Yeah, he calls him. Yeah, uh, Goody Two Shoes and the Filthy Beast. That's what he
yes,
calls him. Yeah, yeah. It's
and
great.
he's Bo
And the
Peep.
oh, and he's Bo Peep. But Cary Grant refuses to use the name a lot of times when he's calling in because um, he doesn't want to say this is little Bo Peep calling Father Goose. He's just like he's like Howden, and they're like, you mean Bo Peep? And he's like, come on, they're supposed to use code names because they're in the war. But anyway, it's a lot of fun. I liked this one better than Petticoat overall. I thought he and Leslie Caron had really good chemistry actually. So I think it's just I like Cary Grant when he's working with a woman. I just think he does better
Yeah.
with
Well,
a female.
the back and forth is great, and they do a good job
Hmm.
of it in this movie. And I definitely like this one better than Operation Petticoat too.
As well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we're out of time, Mo, but I appreciate you being on again. We'll think of something else to do for our next show. Maybe
All
we'll do
right.
some other actor, or maybe we'll just do newer movies. I know you do watch newer movies too.
I do. With you
So,
often.
yes, in fact, with me. So we'll go to our website at realfilmsnobs.com. Make sure to go to YouTube and subscribe to our channel. We always can use more subscribers. We're on CC Media, Scan TV, Corvallis, Access Media, and Corvallis, KMUZ Radio, and KMWV. Thank you as always. Thank you to Mo for being on the show again. Have a great day and great movie.